face is the front of shop. My face is the real shop.
Y'all better let me know if you want me to make videos like this, where I'm on camera and looking pretty and stuff. You all saw the title, so what exactly do I mean by the philosophy of femboys? Well, to get into that, I'll need to make sure we're all on the same page regarding the definitions and manifestations of the femboy phenomenon. For this essay, I'll do away with attempting some kind of coherent definition of femboy, and just say a femboy is a person who identifies as a femboy. The femboy community is incredibly diverse, and for every definition you could come up with, there's probably a person who identifies as a femboy and who most people would identify as a femboy who breaks that rule. However, I would say usually, but not always, a femboy is a person assigned male at birth who presents themselves in a way traditionally associated with femininity. A bit of history on femboys. The term originated in the 90s, being the same vague definition I mentioned before, which is surprising to me considering I thought I was obviously the first femboy, but whatever. In 2013, Pornhub made us official by adding us as a searchable category on their site, after which internet searches for femboys increased significantly. It was originally derogatory, but by the 2010s, femboy had become more of a neutral descriptor. I'm going to admit this is kind of indicative of the strong connection between femboys and sexuality, though some femboys have been trying to push against that. That being said, r/femboys, a porn subreddit, has 655,000 subscribers, while r/femboy, the safe for work version of that, has 253,000 subscribers, so less than that. Since 2013, femboys, relatively, have exploded in popularity, spreading through memes like femboy hooters and trends like femboy Friday. These days, many people identify as and go about their lives as femboys, and the community is getting bigger and bigger.
Some people can lead back do this. I'm not like this, but some people do. Most of them probably do. Basically, what I'm saying is, it went from to let's make this cool, meme, TikTok, aesthetic, content, wholesome, and back to
At first glance, it seems contradictory for a boy, man, or anyone else male to deliberately take on feminine characteristics, especially if you understand gender as a socially constructed category separate from sex. It seems odd to identify as the gender that is not the one you present as, almost like the opposite of what we would normally think of as a transsexual or transgender person. Many femboys even take pleasure in the confusion surrounding this classification, which is why the word trap was strongly associated with the community until recently when it became generally pretty controversial. The thing is, if we use the American Psychological Association's definition of transgender, that being an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does not conform to that typically associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth, we'd have to say femboys are definitely trans, since femboy gender expression isn't the typical gender expression associated with the male sex. The very fact that femboys choose, especially despite significant social pressure, to present femininely indicates a genuinely atypical gender identification that qualifies femboys to be trans. That being said, despite the fact that many femboys are trans women who feel little gender dysphoria, a femboy while identifying as such would be what Robin Dembroff in her 2020 essay, Beyond Binary, refers to as genderqueer, which she defines as a critical gender kind, or a kind whose members collectively destabilize one or more elements of dominant gender ideology. As such, according to Robin Dembroff, genderqueer is a category whose members collectively destabilize the binary axis, or the idea that the only possible genders are the exclusive and exhaustive kinds, men and women. They do so based on desired gender categorization that conflicts with this binary. Now, there might be some who initially disagree with this categorization of genderqueer, as femboys, while incorporating elements of masculinity and femininity, don't reject classification through binary terminology. But, according to Robin Dembroff,
being genderqueer need not be about refusing clothing, behaviors, speech, affect, or roles that would typically be read as feminine, masculine, or any combination of the two. Rather, it often concerns rejecting the binary at a conceptual level. That is, rejecting the idea that their way of being in the world should always be understood via the binary and oppositional concepts of feminine and masculine. In an interview with the Washington Post, 18-year-old Kelsey Beckham, who identifies as non-binary, states, "I don't want to be a girl wearing boys' clothes, or a girl who presents as a boy. I just want to be a person who is recognized as a person. That's how I'm most comfortable. I'm just a person wearing people's clothes." The bold assertion of just being a person wearing people's clothes strikes at any attempt to analyze genderqueer solely in terms of external perceptions. Genderqueer persons differ wildly with respect to their assigned sex, perceived sex, and whether or not they function within traditionally masculinized or feminized gender roles. If anything holds them in common with respect to gender presentation, it is only a general rejection of having their presentation interpreted through a binary lens.
While many femboys do identify as boys dressing as or presenting as girls, the fact remains that femboys inherently reject an identification of our behaviors through the gender binary, because otherwise we would just be binary trans women. The embrace of boyish characteristics in the femboy identity is essentially a reframing of masculine characteristics as feminine, causing them not to be oppositional to femininity, but one and the same. The femboy aesthetic invites one to engage with masculine characteristics in the same way one would engage with feminine characteristics, not only opposing but reversing traditional associations so much the two ends of the binary become indistinguishable, making it impossible to interpret the identity through that binary framework. Many femboys again play into the seeming contradiction through trap culture, keeping certain masculine elements of their presentation or personality, deliberately drawing attention to their identification as male, or their male anatomy, etc. But whether or not a femboy does this, the category nonetheless challenges our traditional conception of what it means to be male or female, and so can be described with traditional conceptions of masculinity or femininity. Being genderqueer doesn't mean being androgynous. Defining genderqueer like that would include a lot of people who aren't genderqueer, and as Robin Dembroff points out, even genderqueer people who are androgynous often describe their androgyny as an expression but not the totality of being genderqueer, emphasizing in addition an affective or political orientation towards the gender binary. Now, many femboys identify as cisgender, so despite the APA's definition of transgender, I'm using a modified version of Dembroff's definition of genderqueer that includes people who don't identify as non-binary, whereas Dembroff doesn't seem to make as much of a distinction in her essay. That being said, I think what separates femboys from tomboys, butch lesbians, cross-dressers, feminine men in general, and other forms of gender nonconformity generally considered cisgender, though they probably would be considered transgender by the APA's definition, is a desire to contradict the gender binary, and not to change it. Femboys gain their definition through contrast with traditional masculinity, whereas tomboys, butch lesbians, and cross-dressers seek to make atypical behaviors acceptable within their binary gendered identifications. For femboys, femininity creates an alternate form of masculinity that, instead of seeking to amend traditional expressions of binary sexuality, revels in the contradictions between expression and identification. In a way, being a femboy is a form of gender warfare against traditional patriarchal masculinity. It's no surprise we're, for better or worse, also known for being extremely politically polarized, since it requires the strength of character to deliberately contradict dominant gender ideology through making femininity a different but desirable trait in people who identify with male characteristics. In trans discourse, trans femmes are often given, for better or worse, more attention than their trans masc counterparts. Trans femmes are more visible, more influential, but also more of a vector for hate. Most reactionary rhetoric about trans people is about trans women in sports, trans women in bathrooms, men who think that they're women, etc. I'm going to be frank and say I think it's because trans femmes present more of a challenge to patriarchal notions of gender value. Trans misogyny, the intersection of transphobia and misogyny, manifests in a form of violence ostensibly justified because of our male identity, but in fact carried out because of our female characteristics. Feminist writer Julia Serrano notably argues that the devaluation of feminine males is a distinctive form of traditional sexism, which she calls effeminania. I assume coming from the word effeminate. This of course serves to repress closeted or unaware trans femmes, who often display feminine characteristics throughout their lives, making it a subset of trans misogyny. Because of this, the reframing of feminine characteristics in male-identifying people as not only acceptable, but desirable, is really radical, and I think, given the combative and contradictory nature of the identity, sufficient to make it one of Dembroff's critical gender kinds. Our existence inherently challenges the idea that there are only different kinds of men and women who gravitate towards one side of presentation or another. Femboys only exist to contradict what we think of as male, a revolt against the cultural influence of effeminania. But really, we wouldn't need to exist as we do if it weren't for patriarchy. The taboo around femboys is something I think feminists should attack as we fight against the oppressive constraints of enforced gender and patriarchy. Shulamith Firestone discussed this post-genderist feminist goal in her book, The Dialectic of Sex, arguing the end goal of feminist revolution must be, unlike of the first feminist movement, not just the existence of male privilege, but the sex distinction itself. Genital differences between human beings would no longer matter culturally. The reproduction of the species by one sex for the benefit of both would be replaced by at least the option of artificial reproduction. Children will be born to both sexes equally, or independently of either, however one chooses to look at it. The dependence of the child on the mother and vice versa would give way to a greatly shortened dependence on a small group of others in general, and any remaining inferiority to adults in physical strength would be compensated for culturally. We could move towards a society where the circumstances of our birth don't have to dictate the way we identify, dress, behave, or interact with other people. We can just be people, being people. And that sounds a lot freer to me.
Thanks so much to Fussy Zeus, Maria Person, Michael Gallagher, Nora, Technica, The Good Elaborates, Anne Rust, Oreed, Bamiluka, Darth Cyrax, Garrett Poke, Krampus, Montron, Peanut256, Pinball Witch, Questing Refuge, and Sweet Pea System for sponsoring today's video. If you'd like to have your name read at the end of these videos, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/satenmadpun. You can also make a one-time donation at patreon.com/satenmadpun. Yes, I was serious. Join the Discord, follow my Instagram, follow my Twitter, listen to my music, like, subscribe, share, comment, tell your friends, make response videos, suck my dick. Okay, bye!